Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Neil with Portal to Ascension. Thank you all so much for being with us here today. Hi to all the live listeners. This is Awarewolf Radio, and we're going live on Zoom right now, but we are also on Spotify, Pandora, and on iTunes. Awarewolf Radio is a project between Justin DeChamps and myself, Neil Gore, and where we bring on speakers every couple of weeks. But what I have been thinking about doing is, bringing on other speakers, other moderators to help out, not only create content for Awarewolf Radio, but also bring forward amazing information about what is happening now, especially in regards to ETs and UFO disclosure. I want to say hi and welcome everybody in the chat room because we are actually live on Zoom right now. And I sent an email out this morning, just a really quick impromptu email to our list to let them know if they wanted to come and join us on Zoom. You can do so. So I see we have around 25 people here live. So welcome everybody joining us. And today we're going to be bringing on a few speakers and have an open panel discussion. And I'm extremely excited to be doing this and joining forces with my good friend, Alan Steinfeld, which we've done many events with, a lot of them around this topic of UFOs. So Alan, thank you, brother, so much for being here.
Well, Neil, it's always great to get the opportunity to do this because I think what we're doing is bringing information that is feeding the public with an awakening of consciousness. And I know that's what Portal to Ascension is about, exactly, is awakening consciousness. So I'm very happy to host as many of these as we can.
Exactly. And right now, a lot of people, they are at home or they have more time at home. And this is a perfect opportunity to be informed about these topics, because when, things return to somewhat normality, many people are going to be going back to the rat race, back to, working and putting in all that energy into basically the system that we've been created, right? So right now is a perfect opportunity, if you do have more time, to really listen to these kind of podcasts and create this kind of content.
Right, but I don't think there's any normal. I don't think we're going back to normal. I think normal doesn't work. And I think it also gives the UFO community a real foot up to make a real impact, because this is what we've been fighting against, this whole normal mindset mentality. And now suddenly that's been wiped away. So, this is a perfect time to talk about disclosure, contact, experience, because people are sort of ready for anything at this point. So that's why I'm very happy we're doing this today.
Definitely, brother. So, okay, do you want to go ahead and introduce who we're going to be bringing on?
Yeah, well, these are some of my favorite UFO experts. We have the #1 researcher in Canada, Grant Cameron, who's actually done a lot of work investigating the Freedom of Information Act and US presidents and their whole involvement with the topic. Grant's gone through each US president and seen their relationship to the UFO phenomena. And he's also gotten more into consciousness, and he has his own incredible shows. So welcome, Grant. And who else do we have? We have Kathleen Marden, who actually probably has the longest history that I know of anyone involved in this topic. I mean, she's the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. Betty Hill was Kathleen's aunt, and she's been in this from the beginning. And so I would say Kathleen is one of the most well-informed people on the whole topic of experience, UFO, contact, abductions, all that, because you could say it sort of started in the modern era with Betty and Barney Hill in 1961. And from there, it's just kind of mushroomed in a way, the awareness of what actually is happening or has been happening. And then we have my good friend, Rey Hernandez, who had, I would say, a spontaneous awakening to the UFO phenomena. I'm not sure, was it 2000? I mean, he'll tell us, but it was pretty recent. I mean, compared to like Kathleen, it was pretty recent. And Rey has sort of turned the movement around. He said, oh my God, if this is really exists, we gotta get this out to the public. So him and Edgar Mitchell and Rudy Shield, along with Kathleen and other people, started the free organization. Now that's evolved now into something else. I'm sure Ray will tell us, but they did something very important, which conducted the first widespread survey. I think they did 4,200 people about their UFO contact experiences, and they made some startling discoveries about that population. And that is really exciting. So he brings a whole new thing to the phenomena, which has been growing. And I guess Ray has shown up. Well, welcome there. We'll get Ray on there. But Grant, I heard you had some news about disclosure that's coming up. Do you want to share anything that you've heard lately?
It's a secret, I can't tell you. There's all sorts of stuff. Donald Trump is on. I'm trying to get the details. What he said, he was asked by Donald Trump Jr. in an interview on a show called Triggered. I was going to ask him, are there aliens? What's the deal with the aliens? They're promoting that. That's the one thing. The other thing is this Wilson leak thing has blown up again after Billy Cox did an article.
Wait, what's the Wilson leak thing? I missed that.
Well, the Wilson leak was the Eric Davis notes where, you know, this whole thing. And now Billy Cox did an article and he went back to Vice Admiral Wilson and he denied it for the fourth time. And of course, now everybody's jumping on it. And the New York Post, Stephen Greenfield at New York Post, is going to do an article. He did an interview with Eric Davis, and Eric Davis confirmed that the notes were from the Edgar Mitchell file. And so he's going to release that. And last night I did a podcast where I go through my involvement in the thing, and I actually go through the transcript of what was in that interview between Greenfield and Eric Davis. And then the big rumor is that the New York Times is about to drop another bomb. And I heard it. I heard it when they went in 2017. I got the word that they were going to do it, and nobody believed it, and they did it. And that's the word out now, and it's got to do with crash retrievals. So let's see what happens.
Well, they Elizondo admitted there were crash retrievals on that Fox News show a few months ago, right?
But the thing is, when the New York Times says it's real, then it's real. Until then, nobody believes it. So and it's Blumenthal and Leslie Kean, from what I hear. And they're sort of involved with the Wilson document, but they're more interested in something. It's almost like there's been a drop or something, that they've got something, and that's the rumor that's been running around for about a week now, that it's past, it's at the editor stage and lawyering and stuff like this, and so we'll see what happens.
That's exciting. Great. Well, let's talk to Kathleen. Kathleen, you look great there. Your eyes are bright blue in this screen, and I want to kind of steer this program towards the latest. You know, we've, of course, heard about abductions and experiences and so much for so long. Is there anything new you feel coming on the scene that is a surprise for people, or would be a wake-up call? Or what's the latest you feel in this field, Kathleen?
I think that more and more people are beginning to realize that this is benign. They will come with the impression that this is something that is harmful to them, that they're being exploited, and will be very, very fearful, and a lot of times angry. But I'm finding that more and more people are able to lose that fear very rapidly when they find out what is really going on. And also in the hypnosis sessions that I have done, I haven't been able to do any in a while now because of the virus, but in the ones that I have done more recently, everybody is discovering that they are being taken to craft to visit with their family, and that in a previous lifetime, they were part of whatever race of ETs that was. And it's a homecoming, and they don't want to come back here. They have to, but that's what they're telling me.
You know, there's always these two different stories. I'm sure Grant with it, that, you know, I just read an article where some scientist says there are at least 36 inhabited, alien planets out there. And then there's our side that says they're already here, so there's this real sort of schizophrenic understanding, because obviously people have had experiences. Ray himself had a mind-blowing experience. And but before I get to you, what do you think of those two different stories, these parallel tracks? Yeah, there's life out there somewhere, and our side, yeah, there's life here, and they're here with us. I mean, how do we bring those two together? You know what I'm saying, Kathleen?
I know what you're saying, but I don't know what the answer is. I mean, you have people who consider themselves to be a certain type of scientific, the type of scientific that will only look at some of the evidence. And they're not willing to look at the evidence that people are actually being visited, or that the Navy has radar video of craft that is actually here, that we have a few thousand, probably, I believe it's 4,000 pieces of physical trace evidence related to craft.
Yeah.
And, but there are people who simply will not accept that. It's too much of a leap for them. They're more comfortable thinking that maybe there's a planet out there that might be inhabited by intelligent life, and maybe someday we'll be able to visit with them, but they don't want them coming here.
I feel like we're tunneling from two different sides. There's the experiencers, they're digging a tunnel into the pot, and there's a scientist that says maybe there's life out there. Somewhere, I think it's going to meet and say, guess what? We got company. Well, let me talk to Ray here, and then I'll get back to you, Grant, about all this, because Ray, you started the free organization with Edgar Mitchell. It was about experiences, but now you've gotten a little more away from that a little bit, and saw it was a part of a much bigger picture. Can you talk about that leap from contact experience to the whole idea of consciousness that you've been now focusing on, and the contact modalities?
Well, first of all, I just want to give a shout out to my dear friend Kathleen, because she looks like she had a medical healing, because she looks like 20 years younger.
You do, Kathleen.
Than her age. Something must have happened to her the last few weeks. I know she's very much familiar with the medical healing literature, and so she just looks absolutely amazing. She looks like her daughter, So.
You really do look great, Kathleen.
My hair's growing longer. Maybe that's it.
I think Ray's right. You've had an activation of something.
Well, that would be nice.
And a couple of weeks ago, if you would have seen me, I would have looked like an 80-year-old man with puffy white hair going all the way down and a big gigantic beard, like the Cuban Santa Claus. And hello, Grant. It's been a while since we chatted.
Yeah, Ray, good to see you.
It's nice to see everybody. Yeah, so tell us about the latest in your research, Ray.
Well, since my experience, initially with that medical healing that occurred in my living room, and then
with your dog, right?
With the dog, yeah. The witness.
What year was that again?
That was in March of 2012.
Okay.
And then initially I thought it was paranormal, because there was no UFOs associated with it. And then my wife began to call down her angels, because she had been praying all night for an angelic intervention. So she was the one that initially initiated all of this because of her praying. She had just come from a prayer retreat at her church for 3 days straight, 8 hours a day of praying. So she was charged up. Kathy knows what that is, charging someone up and then activating something. And so, and then all of a sudden, she began to pray at night outside, and these huge UFOs would appear. And there was a series of incidents over a 3-month period. And so then I knew that it was UFO related. And then I myself called down the very first time I ever tried to do what my wife did, except I didn't pray, because I'm At that time, I was not a spiritual person at that time, but I did call them down, and 15 minutes, this huge, gigantic UAP appeared less than 30 feet away from me, lasted for about 45 minutes. And my daughter had the privilege, I say privilege, and honor of interacting with that intelligence associated with that craft, and there was 3 adult friends. But then there was a whole series of experiences that I rarely talk about because it's just so.
You could talk about it with us, though.
And involved a series of near-death related experiences, and that was what gave me spirituality. But it was it's very elaborate, so I don't have the time to talk about that. And so after the series of near-death experience, which culminated in December 21st, December 22nd, December 23rd, the very first 3 people I ever mentioned NDEs to, all of them had an NDE. So obviously that's not a coincidence, okay? And then there was someone later on that told me about December 21st, 2012, with the Mayan calendar. I still don't understand much about it because I'm not into metaphysics, but it was
all happening around the same time. Because I do think that Mayan calendar was an activation on a global level.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what happened. At least for me, at a personal level, after 4 months of having these NDE-related experiences, then 3 days in a row, boom, boom, boom. My daughter's pediatrician, this man at church, and then my father. All of them had NDEs, and my father had the most profound NDEs. So it was at that point I was beginning to realize that this is way, way more complex than just UFOs. And then in May, the first week of May, and actually, Grant, it was the week before I met you and Kathy at that conference in
Sebring.
In Sebring, correct,
yeah.
Where you introduced me to Chris Bledsoe on the phone. It was a few days after that event, after I got home, I had an out-of-body experience where I was taken out of my car in the middle of a traffic jam, and I was brought to this other, what I call a matrix reality, where I was inside this big, gigantic spinning wheel, and I was shown all of the contact modalities, that they were all interrelated. And that was an animated video experience, sort of like that movie Contact with that famous actress
Jodie Foster.
It was very similar to that, except you're in there, And so, and there I basically learned that all of what humans are calling the different ways that humans are piercing the veil and having contact with non-human intelligence via UFOs, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, perceived angels with ghosts and spirits, shamanic journeys, transcendental meditations where you get brought to other realities, OBEs, et cetera, that all of this is all one phenomenon. Why? Because they physically showed it to me, and plus the downloads that they were telling me, all of that information. And
right.
then and then it was immediately after that, within 2 days, that I was introduced to Mary Rodwell, to Rudy Shield, and Edgar Mitchell. First, it was Mary Rodwell that got an email that was delayed for 6 months. And I think Kathy knows the story, and maybe Grant knows, but I know that she spoke to Mary, and Mary verified, to Kathy, okay? And then Rudy too. Rudy told the story to Kathleen because they were all member of our group. So then Rudy calls me the very next day at 9:30 in the morning, and we had a very lengthy conversation. Rudy, for the audience members, is an emeritus professor of astrophysics at Harvard. And then he introduced me to Edgar Mitchell, who invited me to his home the very next day. And so it was at the home of Edgar Mitchell that the Free Foundation was started. And it was all 2 days after I had that out-of-body experience, which taught me all about the contact modalities.
Yeah. Let's just stay with the contact modalities. And I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just want to get everyone involved, because I think the contact modalities are showing us that the UFO, and you could explain what that means, but it shows us that the UFO phenomena is related. This is what I feel, and it's what I'm bringing out in this book I'm putting together called Making Contact, that human beings are much more than we've been told we are. That's really what I get from the bottom line as we investigate this phenomenon. Like we're told like there's consciousness, but we've been put into a very small box, And I think the ETs, whoever they are trying to take us out of this box and show us that we are as unlimited as any being. Does that make sense, Ray? And I'll get everyone to jump.
Yes, I think I agree with that, that it's an awakening of our consciousness to who we really are, which is multidimensional beings.
Right.
And just in terms of, this whole concept, I knew, from, very soon after my initial experience, but definitely solidified after my experience and then my meetings with Mary, with Rudy and Edgar. And then later on, Kathy joined the group, and Denise Stoner and many other, Bob Davis, a whole array of academics and researchers. I wrote an article in August of 2013. August of 2013 is right when we had our first free meeting. I don't know if Kathy remembers that day. We had tons of people in that call. So I wrote an article right before then, which we eventually put in our website. And it was titled something along the lines of Dr. Edgar Mitchell's quantum hologram theory of consciousness and the contact modalities. And then that's the first time I used that I think that term was used, the contact modalities. And it was to introduce this concept to this ufology.
Explain what that means, the contact modalities, and then we'll hear from, how do you explain,
Yeah, the way I utilized that term in 2013 was exactly what was given to me in my experience, that humans are having numerous ways that they're piercing the veil of our reality, and they're having contact with non-human intelligence, consciousness, intelligence, whatever you want to define it. And that, and I explained earlier, these are, out-of-body experiences, near-death experience, UFOs, whatever. And so what it is that they're all interrelated via what humans are calling consciousness. And all of them involve a manipulation of space-time. That's the key to it all. And when you're talking about space-time, we're talking about the thesis that we live in a multi-dimensional reality. Right. And space-time is how that multi-dimensional reality is being manipulated. So in a nutshell, that's a very, very brief description of it.
Oh, I know, and that's great because Grant's also done lectures about it. And Grant, so you were a nuts and bolts guy. There were lights, and then suddenly the consciousness understanding of ET, whatever this non-human thing happened to you, this realization. But what do you make about who we are as human beings in all the work and research you've done along with those contact modalities? And I'll ask Kathleen that too.
Okay, well, Desta Barnaby and I just released a book, 400-page book called Contact Modalities. So we go through all the modalities and we show how they're all linked together. And all of this, when you get down to it, I say it's going to be 1,000 times more complex than people think it is. You even take Ray's experience in 2012, and he talks about these synchronicities of Mary Rodwell's letter. Let me add some more synchronicities. A week before Ray had that experience with the dog, I had my awakening experience listening to Colin Andrews, where this message came in my head: it's all consciousness. And I couldn't think for 2 days. And that's when I made the move away from documents, away from the president. That's when I made the move down the consciousness road. That was a week before Rey Hernandez. And Chris Bledsoe, who had his experience in 2007, got sort of blown apart in 2008 by the people around him when he went public, said, I'm never going to talk again. Within days after Ray, he was visited by the lady in light, who told him, you have a message and it's yours to carry. And he's now sort of one of the prominent guys with this message running around. So you have these synchronicities of what happened around 2012. But I'll give you a couple of examples of what I'm working on now, and that's these crossovers between different modalities. And the Whitley Strieber's wife, Ann, when they got the couple 100,000 letters after they did communion, she came out of the room and she said, Whitley, whatever this is, it has something to do with death. And I would say that's absolutely, I just did an interview with the woman who was the chief researcher for Jeffrey Long, who did the near-death experience, wrote the #1 best-selling book at the New York Times, and did the big questionnaire, which Ray, they used for theirs, the same questions. And I asked her the question about this thing about, and Kathy's done this study on people who are able to, destroy electronics, and they have this field around them. It's exactly the same thing in near-death experience. It's identical. If you take out the alien component or the near-death experience, you can't tell which is which. They can't wear watches. They destroy electronic equipment. Lights go out around them. It's exactly the same thing. Or I'll give you two other examples. So you have the near-death experience people. I have an experiencer by the name of Ron Johnson, who's a Mormon guy who says he has 36 out-of-body experiences. And in 3 of them, the being whose name is Elby takes him to the spirit world, and he meets his dead mother in the spirit world, and she takes him for a tour, and she takes him to this place that looks like a Mormon temple in Nephi, Utah. And she says, this is where you're going to come when you die. And he says, I go into the building. It's a little tiny building, like a little temple. I go inside, and it's 10 times the size inside as it is outside. As soon as he said that, I said, that's exactly what Chris Bledsoe said. Chris Bledsoe, when he was flying the craft, and I wanted to know, how do you fly the craft? And he's doing this consciousness thing, how you fly the craft. He tells me, I go inside the craft, and it's 10 times the size inside as it outside. I go back outside, and it's small. I go inside, it's 10 times the size. Terry Lovelace says the same thing. It's 10 times the size inside as it is outside. It's the same story in the spirit world. Then Ron Johnson telling me the story. He's in this building, and his mother takes him down to the far end of the building, and he's got these crystals that are coming out of this table. And he's looking at these crystals, and you can see your lifetime. You can see, and he sees a crystal for his dog, and he can look back and he sees the dog, how the dog died. He never knew how his dog died, that the neighbor shot it. So everybody has a crystal according to what his mother showed him in the spirit world, that you can see your past lives, you can plan your next lives and stuff. And when you come into the spirit world, you have this crystal. Well, that's 1988 UFO cover-up live. It's exactly the story that was told in there. And Richard Doty, the Falcon, says the most amazing thing I was told in the UFO world was that the aliens had this crystal, and they could show you all the events of the history of the world by looking in this crystal at a certain angle. It's exactly the same story. And you see these crossovers time and time and time again, this connection between out-of-body experiences and death. And to me, it's so close. It's unbelievable when you start crossing these things over. Do you want to know what Donald Trump said?
Yeah, well, sure. If he said anything, I mean.
Yeah, he did. Okay, here's the news. You got a breaking news here. He was asked by Trump Jr. if he would consider.
When did he was asked?
Couple minutes ago.
Oh, okay.
He was asked by Trump Jr. if he would consider disclosing about Roswell and the aliens. He said that everybody was asking him about that and that he would consider it.
What would he disclose? That it was real? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm just telling you what was said. That was the conversation. Donald Trump has a show or something, and he interviewed on the show. So that was his answer, that he's being asked about it all the time, and that he would consider disclosing the Roswell story.
That's pretty amazing news. I mean, if that's true, that would definitely put him in a different light for some people. But
what I would say with that is it really doesn't matter. People always bring up this disclosure, and I've talked to you about this before. It really doesn't matter about whether the government knows or not. This is an individual thing. I'm starting to get into the stuff about what's really going on, and I think it's like the 14th to 15th century, where we're going to suddenly learn that the world is not flat. You have the things like John Wheeler, who came up with the theory of the black hole and the wormhole theory and stuff like that, won the Nobel Prize for Physics, said there is no out there. Bashar said exactly the same. There is no out there. If you talk to people who do out-of-body, the top guy who does out-of-body experiences will say, when you have an out-of-body experience, you do not go out, you go in. There is no out there. When you die, you go within. It's all within yourself. And that is a real revolutionary thing about this idea that we say there's no time and space. And then we start saying, oh, there's planets out there and there's this far away and this is how they get here. And the whole thing may be, there is no out there. It's all within ourselves. So it really doesn't matter what the government is doing or what's going on out there. This is an individual thing, and it's all tied into death and consciousness. And it may all be as Jacques Vallée sort of made this comment. It's like a giant kabuki theater, and the only message is that we aren't alone.
Right. No, thank you, Grant, because it goes along with what my whole thesis is that we need to know more of who we are as human beings, and we're much more complex and vast and expansive. So
and let me just add one more thing, because Rey is into this too as well. I would say Rey would agree with me that you've got to realize the first lesson is that consciousness is the basis of reality. It's not nuts and bolts. And that until you get to that point and you get that thing, you're never going to figure it out. You're always going to be going down the wrong road.
I agree. Kathleen, since you've been in this field for so long, since the time, what were you, 6 years old or something?
I was 13.
13, sorry.
Yes.
13 when your mother got that call from her sister saying,
Yes.
guess what? Was there an awareness of this idea of consciousness with Betty Hill at that point, or was she still kind of freaked out about the whole thing?
You know, Betty Hill was a very nuts and bolts kind of person. She and I used to argue about this all the time because, you know, I would say, well, don't you believe any of the experiencers who are saying that they're being taken through a solid surface? And she would just say, oh, if somebody told me that, I'd ask to see the bill for the repair. She just didn't believe that at all. But it made for good debates between the two of us. But, you know, the contact modalities are very important, and it's something that Rey touched upon, learned about. So many people are learning that kind of thing too, people who have been at that same area for teaching. And what we find as well is people who meditate. If you meditate on a regular basis, you're able to communicate telepathically with non-human entities. I took part in an experiment for 3 years with a man named Kevin Briggs. He lives right in the town I live in Florida.
I know Kevin. Yeah, he's a great guy. Yeah.
And it was to learn about consciousness from these extraterrestrials that he has been in communication with since he was a little boy. And it was really amazing because it gave me the opportunity to feel their presence, a very strong electrical tingling sensation through the body, to actually communicate with them telepathically. And myself, not just channeling through Kevin, but each of those people who were able to learn from Kevin and from Ort, who was doing some of the teaching. He has a group of 7 that he communicates with. But it was absolutely fascinating to have that occur. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but the MUFON's Experiencer Research Team did a 3-year study on experiencers. Rey and I talked about it because I was part of Rey's study as well. And we thought that we would ask many of the questions that were very similar to the questions that Free was asking. And I helped to develop Free's questions too. And we discovered that 65% of experiencers have actually had light orbs in their homes that appear to have intelligence. And sometimes these light orbs can expand into a non-human entity.
Right.
Now, one of the cases that I have been working on for about 8 years now involves a man who lives in the same town that Grant lives in. Grant is familiar with his case. His name is Jim. And he had developed lymphoma. And so I said, he was very upset. And I said to him, well, Jim, have you asked your ETs for healing? I said, I know that you can be healed. I've been healed. And so I said, I'll ask for you. And I'm going to send this message out and you do it as well. And a couple of weeks later, he was in touch with me again. He was so upset about the lymphoma, first of all, but he had a video. And this video shows an orb that comes down into his house, slides down the wall in front of his bedroom closet door, flies like a beautiful butterfly. It's white with a baby blue halo.
Wow.
It moves over his body. It puts out beautiful kind of mother of pearl tendrils. And then it dives down into his body. And when he wakes up at about 1 o'clock the next day, the nodes on his neck that were so large were now tiny. He went in for surgery 2 weeks later, and 4 tiny necrotic nodes were removed. No cancer. Dr. Joseph Burks, wrote about this case. I told Joe about it. And he wrote about it in Free's book, Beyond UFOs, the science of consciousness. What is it, Ray?
It's the science of consciousness and contact with non-human intelligence. It's Beyond UFOs, the science of consciousness and contact with non-human intelligence.
Thanks, Ray.
All we have to do is ask, Kathleen, would you say, or do you have a special connection?
I tell experiencers to ask, because I know, for years I was ill. I had a disabling disease, and I didn't know that I could ask. I was during that time frame when I was just terrified and thought I was being exploited. But eventually, I talked to an experiencer in Australia who said, you can ask for healing and you can possibly receive it. And so I did. Wow. And 4 days later, I never thought that I would actually receive it. But 4 days later, I was in bed and I woke up feeling just intense pain through my body. And then I realized that I wasn't in my bed, that I was in some kind of environment. It was kind of hazy. There were glowing, I think, entities up by my head from what I could see. I don't know if they put this vision in my mind or if I was looking at a chart or whatever it was. I could see my body lying there. But it was just the outline of the body, and certain organs were colored, and I could see movement through the periphery of my body, and I felt a very strong tingling sensation, and I was healed. Wow. When I woke up the next morning, I felt like I was 23 years old again. It was just incredible, and I haven't had a relapse of that disease since that date.
This is
2012.
This is where the whole phenomena, I think, is going for all of us who've been sort of on the cutting edge, to show we have these connections, these higher connections. But I also think it's an aspect of the veil being thinner between these worlds. Like Grant said, that Whitley said it's all about, Ann Strieber said it's all about the dead. But I think they must be closer. It seems like this is the evolution. Some people call the ascension, is we're getting closer to the unseen realms. And does that make sense, like Kathleen?
It makes sense to me. Yeah. Definitely. I do feel that there's a thinning of the veil. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are having these experiences now in a totally different way than we thought of back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. Right. People are beginning to really wake up to what is, in fact, occurring.
Mm. My favorite line of John Mack, if people know John Mack, the Harvard professor of psychiatry, who wrote a book called Abduction, validating that these people are truly experiencing something. Anyway, John said that UFOs are like an outreach program from the universe for the consciously impaired, meaning humans. And so we are getting our consciousness awakened. He also said, if we're really going to understand this, we have to have other ways of knowing. So I think these other ways of knowing is this intuitive, shamanic, non-intellectual way. Don't you think so, Grant? That there's another part we have to start to think with than just the logical mind?
Yeah, and you the other statement that Mac made was the thing to Bud, where he said to Bud, because Bud always had a very negative, interpretation of it. And they had that sort of debate in Boston where he said, Bud, it's kind of strange. He says, I'm the psychiatrist here. You think I'd be getting all the real bad, crazy ones. He says, you're getting all the bad ones, and I'm getting all the spiritual seeking ones. And maybe that has more to do with you and I, and than the aliens, and this idea. And he actually presented the idea that the being that you see may be connected to your own manifestation. So you see, and we've known this for years with the screen imaging, that they can appear as whatever they want. And I've asked a lot of experiences, did you ever ask them if they were an alien? And a lot of them have said, yeah. And they said, well, not really. And you wouldn't understand, or we can't tell you where we come from. And that's where I'm starting to go, where I'm saying, is this really what I think it is? That's what the book I'm writing now is called, Extraterrestrial or Maybe Not. And the conclusion I come to, it's like at least 1,000 times more complex than people think it is. Yeah. And it has these components, like the healing component, which I think Ray can talk about. 50% of all of them say they've either been healed or that they can heal other people. I mean, everybody's into Reiki. They're all Reiki healers. And you get this thing and you say, this is not coincidence that people are saying this kind of stuff. Or when you get somebody, where somebody says it's 10 times the size inside, is it outside? Or you fly the craft with your mind, you say, this is not something you're going to make up. Or in the free survey, it shows 40% say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. The near-death experience people say exactly the same thing, that they were there and they're trying to remember it. They're coming back and they knew the answer to everything. And you see these parallels, which makes us sort of understand that we're on the leading edge. And there is this thinning of the veil, because what I've had lately, you may know, I did the light language thing. Yeah. Suddenly these people started to appear. First one was Mary Rodwell with her kids with his light language. I mean, I've been in this since 75. I had never heard anything like this. And these people are coming out of the woodwork. I could not believe it. And in fact, I go to an experience, I say, can you do light language? And go, yeah, I can do it. You want to hear it? And they would do this light language in like 20 different languages. And then the orbs, when I got onto the orb thing, I wasn't into orbs. And just, I posted this orb thing. I'm going to do an interview shortly, a couple of days, with a woman who's got 130,000 orb photographs. There are people with collections of thousands of orbs, the most amazing photographs you've ever seen. And they all say the same thing. I know when it's there. I had this experience. I go out. I said, you see it? No, I just know when to shoot. I know where it is. I can feel the vibration, which is exactly what Chris Bledsoe says when he was with John Alexander. And then he said to John Alexander, they're here. And John says, how do you know they're here? I just know they're here. I can feel them. They're here. They're here. And suddenly this thing appears and just blows John's mind. And that's the thing, is once you've interacted with the craft and you become one with the craft, which is the main message that I think you're going to put across, is oneness and love are the two main messages. And so you see that, and it's the same thing when you look at out-of-body, the near-death experience stuff and this, it's the same message. It's almost like identical.
Right. So Ray, when you take all this that we're talking about today and everything you've developed, what's the next step for humans to take if we're going to start to like extend our hand into the unknown, whatever this non-human, maybe more than human presence is? Where are we going? What have
okay.
you?
Let me bring us back. Kathy, you can certainly remember it. Back in the summer of 2013, shortly after I met Edgar Mitchell and Rudy Shields. What I told the group way back then, Kathy might remember it, I'm sure she does, was that I told everyone was that, and everyone had the same hypothesis. It's not that we thought differently. We all thought very, very similarly, a little bit different to each other, but along that same path. And that was that whatever we're interacting with is way, way more complex than just a field of ufology. Right. But in order for us to be able to compare and contrast the fields of ufology with out-of-body experiences, with near-death experiences, with remote viewing, etc., with NDEs, there's tons of literature on that, academic literature. With OBEs, not so much as NDEs, but a lot. With remote viewing, there's a lot, etc., etc. With hallucinogens, there's a huge history of hallucinogens and academic research on that. But when it came to UFO contact experiences, there was really no statistical academic research study. Kathy, study that she did with Denise Stoner was pretty much one of the very few studies that had been done, but it was a very small group, very small samples. And also Kenneth Ring had done a comparative contrast analysis of UFO abductees and NDE experiences, but again, only had 85 people in each group. So what I told the group at that time is that we needed to do really a major comprehensive academic research study of UFO contact experiences. And that's what we did. We spent almost a year developing the questions, and Kathy was part of that team. It was a huge group of both academics and researchers. And then we spent 3 years collecting the data. We spent a year analyzing the data, and Kathy was part of that as well. And then we spent like another 6 months writing up the different chapters, and then Bob Davis and myself and John Climo, we were responsible for writing the academic peer-reviewed studies. And just for the audience members out there, I can make available to everyone out there free copies of chapter 1. That's 120 pages filled with data. Tons of data. The chapter on medical healings that Kathy was talking about, written by Preston Dennett and Dr. Joseph Burks, and the peer-reviewed academic research studies. We can make that available for free. Just send me an email to info@experiencer.org. Info@experiencer.org.
Right,
Now,
that is at experiencer.org. But where we got the date?
But let me answer your question. I wanted to
great.
set that up. So from the very beginning, most of the people in our group knew, look, this is like the title of our book, Beyond UFOs, but we need to get data. Okay, that's what we did with our research study. Now, what I've been up to over the last really 3 years while we were still working on free, I was planning on transitioning to the next step. Okay, the next step is getting all of the experiencers of the various contact modalities integrated. Okay, and we're going to be introducing that topic in this new book. I don't know if people can see it. It's titled
A Greater Reality. That looks great. When is that coming out?
Yeah, the title is A Greater Reality, the New Paradigm of Consciousness, the Paranormal, and the Contact Modalities. And as you can see, this is a black hole. This is Dr. Rudy Shields' black hole. and all of these different contact modalities and paranormal topics. I know that Grant was interested for a time there with aports. Aports is one of the topics in there, you know, ESP, etc. So you have all of these paranormal aspects and the contact modality aspects being sucked up in the black hole. And most of the physicists that study black holes, and Rudy was my major resource for me, they've all told me that that space-time breaks down inside the black hole. Okay, yeah. Again, using that concept of space-time breaking down.
Well,
so
you know Nassim Haramein's work.
Yes, yes.
His early, when he was like 9 and 10, 11, he was taken aboard UFOs and given special downloads of new scientific information. Yeah. So anyway.
So my proposal now with this new organization, and the new organization, as you can see here on the bottom, is
what is it? CCR?
CCRI. CCRI, Consciousness and Contact Research Institute. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, what this is an academic organization. We have a few medical doctors in there. We have about 4 MDs, but it's mainly PhD academics. And these are all individuals that think very similar to myself, to you, to Grant and Kathleen. Almost all of them have the hypothesis. And let me give you some of the names. You'll recognize them. Dean Radin, Jeffrey Mishloff. We have Rudy Shields, Dr. Jeffrey Long, Dr. Gary Schwartz.
What about these people? What
okay, there's a huge list. Okay, we've been meeting now for quite some time at a monthly basis, these group Zoom conference calls. Okay. And all of them hypothesize, as I think you had, Grant had mentioned it earlier, that consciousness is primary. Okay, yeah. That our external material reality is basically a facade, you know, that it doesn't really exist, that there's something underneath that. Now, in terms of what consciousness is, nobody knows, okay? It's still a terminology that to be revealed. And also the issue of space-time, we really don't understand space-time. And also, what is the true essence of this non-human intelligence or consciousness intelligence, as Gary Schwartz likes to use prefer that term? We really don't understand that phenomenon. What I and many of these members think, this is way beyond the HET scenario. Most of us, all of us, I should say, speculate that these are not just physical beings from, from Venus or Mars or some planet. That, as Jacques Vallée says, I believe it's something much more interesting.
Right. He said he'd be very disappointed if we
Yes.
found out it was just people from other planets.
Correct. And so what we're doing with this new organization, okay, we're going to be starting a new statistical, both quantitative and qualitative, and in-depth structured interviews of individuals. What we're going to first do is, in our very first survey, we're going to be identifying major contact experiencers of the contact modalities. So these involve individuals that have, for example, let me give an illustration. I went to interview as part of a documentary that I'm working on with a very experienced team. This medical doctor, I won't give the state that she lives, but she's writing the second chapter in this book, okay? This woman's a medical doctor now, okay? She's being young, she was taken out of body and received lessons, numerous lessons, mainly around spirituality, okay, and the multidimensional reality. She has had 12 UFO sightings. Roughly half of them were very, very up close, okay? 5 of them involved a triangle-shaped craft. Twice it flew right above her and her husband, at very, very close, okay? She's had 3 Sasquatch encounters, okay?
Sasquatch, Yetis.
Sasquatch encounters, Yeti encounters, because she lived right across the street from a national park, okay? That road that divided into national park.
Which state does she live in?
Well, I won't give you the state, but
Okay.
it's a very, 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 very rural area.
Okay.
And she's had 2 major NDE experiences. One when she was about 7, and then the last one was about 6 years old. 6 years ago, okay? As she was a medical doctor at that time, she's still relatively young. She's in her early 60s. And that last NDE, to me, gave supporting evidence for the simulation theory of our reality, okay? Right. And I won't go into that detail, but it where her consciousness of who she was, the medical doctor, was uploaded to like a central computer, the mind of God, I won't go into the details, but here's a woman she also has had out-of-body experiences, okay? So here's a major experiencer that's had pretty much many of the contact modalities and many others that I haven't stated. I personally know, and I'm sure Kathleen knows a lot as well, and Grant as well, at least 100 people, each of you know, independently, that are individuals that have had many of these diverse experiences via the contact modalities. Many of them are quiet, okay? There's a couple of medical doctors that I know of, a couple of professors, academics, and a lot of folks that are non-academic. So what we want to be able to first of all do is identify these people, okay? And then once we identify them, and one is my best friend here is a retired DEA federal agent. His wife is a PhD psychologist, and their daughter. And I think Kathy met him a couple of times in Miami, Florida. Very sane, rational man. He was part of the team that brought down Manuel Noriega in Panama. So, that's the level we're talking about. He, I thought, was the major contact experience in the world until we interviewed these 2 ladies in these 2 different states. One was the medical doctors, and they just blew me away. But anyway, we want to be able to identify these people. Then the next step is to bombard them with tons of surveys, both quantitative surveys and qualitative instruments, for them to write out the details to various questions. Mm-hmm. And then, for example, okay, Alan, you have Mr. X, okay? Mm-hmm. Over the next week, you're going to be doing a series of interviews, recording them, okay? And we're going to be using a machine that transcribes your recordings of these people. And then it's the task of analyzing all that data and then comparing it all. By that, Alan, the point that I'm trying to get at is that these individuals hold the key to be able to try to understand what is consciousness, what is the nature of our reality. It's not going to be the theoretical physicists that are going to tell us. It's not going to be the philosophy of the mind professors that are out there teaching these courses on consciousness. It's not going to be the field of neuroscience. It's the experiencers, because these are the people that are interacting with the multiverse, many of them on a weekly basis for all of their lives.
I agree. I think this whole idea of consciousness, though, is an evolving concept. We're like, just starting to define the perimeters of what that means. But no, thank you for all your research. I just want to address a few of the questions in the chat. This first one by Masa, who says that, I heard once you're on board a ship, you'll never be heard from again. How did you know? How do you, I don't know how anyone, if that's true, how could anyone have told her that if they never heard from her? So that's just a contradiction.
Tell her to send me an email, and I'll send her chapter 1, which has tons of onboard experiences.
I know. I've been on board myself, so
okay.
you can come back from it. And then there's of course, the old, why is this being hidden from us, from the public? Grant's been looking into that for years. But let me just see. How do I get in touch with my ET guides? I think you just have to ask for it. I think now I see columns of light, rainbow color. I see shapes, but no idea how to communicate with them better. Just put it out in your mind, right, Kathleen? If someone what would you say to someone who's getting images and trying to communicate?
I would say just relax and go into a meditative state, whatever meditation you want to use. If you don't have a meditation, there on YouTube, there are lots of beautiful guided meditations that you can begin with. And the more you do this, the more adept you become at doing it. And you close your eyes and look into the distance and look for that white light that is going to be coming. You will see the white light, and then project yourself toward that white light. And when you get there, look for entities that you can speak with who will communicate with you telepathically.
Right. And trust yourself, trust your own mind. I say psychology has done a great service to make us more aware of our mind, but it's done a great disservice by making us afraid of our own intuitive awareness. So we have to overcome those psychological, paradigms that have locked us into saying that, we can't get information from the outside, because we can. Telepathy, as all of us will agree, is a big part of the contact experience. Right? Grant, would you say?
Well, let me add to that, because what I came to with the 70 modalities we looked at was it's all the ability to shut down the rational analytical left brain, which is causing the noise, and then you can pick up the signal. So if you're in your normal state, you're in an alpha state. And when you want to go to sleep at night, you got to get to delta. So you got to go from theta down through, or from alpha down through theta to delta to go to sleep. You go through that point before you go to sleep and when you wake up. And that's where you see a lot of the inventions. If you look at inventions like the hologram and the laser and stuff like that, or you take Gary Nolan from, the guy that's doing the DNA experiments with the experiencers, he says, I don't know how it works. I don't know how it works, but I know how to make it work. And he goes through the same process that a lot of people do, is you go through it and you analyze it and you try to figure it out. And then you put the thing beside your bed. That's what Wilbur Smith did in the 1950s in Canada when he ran the Canadian government UFO program. Put the question beside the bed, and then at night when your left brain shuts down, and then they can talk to you. Or like Bashar says, we come to you in your dreams because now you're in our world. So you've got to get to that spot where you got to shut down that noise, the little voice in your head that is telling you this is garbage, this is nonsense. And if you can quiet the mind, the rational thing, you can pick up the signal. The signal is there for everybody. It's the ability to pick up the signal.
Trust it. And what's his name? Thomas Edison used to sleep with a weight in his hand, and when he fall asleep, he dropped the weight, and he'd be in that.
Yeah, I can explain that. Well, I'll tell you that story because there's actually a statue of him. There's a statue where he's holding the ball. So he would sit in a chair in his lab, and he'd say, "I don't sleep at night." But of course, he'd sleep in his lab all the time. So he'd sit on the chair with the arms, and he'd put the ball in his, and he'd put a metal plate on the ground, and then he'd sit there. And of course, then he'd go into theta. He'd be falling asleep. He'd go through theta, and his hand would relax, and the ball would hit the plate and wake him up, and he'd immediately wrote it down. And he had like 3,000 notebooks. That's how he got all his ideas, by going through this process of going through theta. And a lot of channelers will tell you, you get in theta, and that's when you can pick up the signal. But you've got to shut down the noise in the brain.
That's right. No, I think this is what the ETs, non-human contact modalities like Rey is talking about too, is trying to tell us to use a different part of our brain. That and science doesn't validate that, though. That's the kind of thing we're up against. You know, they just want what can be validated by our senses. And what we're all saying, and everyone in this field is saying, no, there's much more to the human being than just your left brain. So, I mean, Rey, in your work with these contact modalities, wouldn't you say it's all about overcoming that logical mind, like Grant and Kathleen? I mean, how do you look at that?
I'm going to be writing, I'm in the process of moving now. As everyone knows, I'm still a tax attorney. I have a full-time job, which consumes me 10 hours a day. So I'm extremely busy. And then, but once I relocate to where I'm going to be moving, this is as of September 1st, I'm going to then open up all my boxes of books and begin writing the introductory chapter to that book. Now there, I'm going to be laying out my hypothesis as to the big picture. As the way I see this, as I stated earlier, we are interacting with a multiverse. And in that multiverse, we're interacting with a conscious intelligence. I don't believe that we're interacting necessarily with, you know, thousands of specific different types of beings, because in our research study, and I'm sure Kathy can state the same thing, people that she's spoken with have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of beings, even grays. When you talk to people like Chris Bledsoe, he described many different types of grays that he's interacted with, my friends, and that's just the grays. So from my perspective, it's either that we're interacting with thousands of different physical entities from thousands of different physical planets, you know, or we're dealing with something a little bit more complicated. Now, what I think,
or both, maybe it could be
correct, both, yes, both. That whatever the physical beings that are actually out there, they're able to put holographic projections into our mind, but they're also able to tap in and interact with this conscious intelligence. You know, the mind of God, whatever you want to term it, okay? But I think that what's happening to each of us as individuals and to many of the experiencers, that these are all pre-planned. There's no coincidence in any of this. Like Grant was saying before, you know, he had a download of consciousness, boom, a couple of days later, I had my experience, boom, a couple of days later, Chris Bledsoe. When I met him at the conference, and Kathy and Denise Stoner was there, and also Yvonne Smith was there at that conference, whatever. Grant said, oh, I just came back from the home of Chris Bledsoe where his dog was completely healed, you know, and it was just a couple of days ago. He said, do you want to talk to Chris, you know? And then right there, he called Chris, you know. That was not a coincidence, because roughly 9 months later, I had an experience where, I'll be very brief, but basically it forced me to go to Chris's home, because whatever intelligence was giving me like a crack addiction hangover, where I had to go see Chris, and I had no idea. I haven't even spoken to this guy in 9 months. And so by the end of the third day, I could have killed my mother to get some money to go up to see Chris, you know? And so I explained it to Chris. He said, but Rey, we could talk on the phone. I said, Chris, you don't understand. I got to see you. But why, Rey? I don't know why. And once I got there, I found out the reason why. And it dealt with that we were both getting these downloads of advanced physics, okay?
Oh.
Which I never talk about, okay? And I won't. But basically, and it had, it was because I was interacting with someone else. I think Kathy knows who I'm talking about. We'll leave it at that. But anyway, the point is that this was not, oh, what a synchronicity, what a coincidence. No, these are all pre-programmed events. And what I speculate is that we're interacting with the mind of God, for lack of a better word, this universal mind that's interacting with us as individuals, but humanity at large, to awaken us to a multidimensional reality. And we're going through this shift, this awakening, to transition to that.
No, I agree with that, but I don't want to discount, you know, going back to Betty Hill, that these beings did see her. They did take her aboard. They did do experiments. So I don't know where the physical, we're saying now there's a big movement in the field. It's all consciousness, like Grant's saying, but we don't want to throw out the ETs. I mean, something exists. Betty had those contacts, and so had, like you said, lots of other people.
Yeah, let me just, before Kathy jumps in, I'm not denying the whole point that they don't exist. Just like Jacques Vallée and Alan Hynek, they were all perplexed because it was both physical and psychic. Right. So they were trying to put it all together, and we're still in that place. So I don't necessarily believe that you have to exclude. My perspective is that whatever this physical ET, these grays, whatever other types of beings that we're interacting with, that their understanding of the nature of reality, they're able to manipulate space-time, whatever these physical beings might be. They're manipulating space-time. So they're very close to the universal mind. They might have even tapped into that in terms of the energy fields, like what we're discussing before with meditation. You have to get into the right frame, whatever. For these people, it's natural, you know. So I'm not throwing out the baby in the bathwater.
No, I just think we need to reorientate ourselves, our own capabilities as human beings. What do you say, Kathleen, about the ET actuality? You know, there is something there.
There appears to be something there where people are taken to craft. They are on tables. Yes. They are being educated. It seems to be a scientific program. And they give people information. An interesting information that I received recently from an experiencer was that she was told that the problem with humans is that our bodies are so dense that when they reincarnate into our bodies, we forget our previous life. But they say that they always remember their previous lives. So that's just one difference. It seems that these extraterrestrials sort of have a spiritual sense. They are aware of these other modalities. The universal language is telepathy. They say that we share one consciousness. So you know, we've come a long way since Betty Hill. When we first began with my aunt and uncle in 1961, being the first humans as far as we knew. They weren't the first, but being taken in the United States. And our minds were all oriented in that time frame toward coming from other planets, nuts and bolts. They're probably using nuclear rockets to get here, that kind of thing. It must take them 65 years. So, how are they doing that? It's totally different than what we initially thought back in the 60s.
But as you're talking, I'll get to Grant in a second. I just want to throw out the idea that maybe we can't just look to the ETs or whatever they are themselves. Maybe we're in a threshold of a planet, of a universal evolution. So the ETs, the non-humans, are evolving as we are evolving. We don't have to look to them as the superior one. It's a total multiverse upgrade is possible. Grant, what do you think about that, and what were you going to say?
Well, I want to make a comment on the physical aspect of this thing, because you find this again across the modalities. So you get a lot of people who are on the ship, and one prime example is Sherry Wild will tell the story. She tells the story. She's 15 years old. She's on the ship, and they bring on Albert Einstein, Albert Schweitzer, and Nikola Tesla, and the girl from World War II, whatever. And of course, I said to her, I said, oh, let me ask you a question. Were they really physical? She said, well, it may have been a really good hologram, but they sure looked physical to me. The same as when 2 days before my father died, his father came. So his father's dead, he's in spirit or whatever, and he comes, but he comes like a flesh and blood person, and he's in my father's room just before he dies. And so it's...
Did you see him, Grant?
No, my father wouldn't even tell me. He told my mother, because he knew I'd probably say, I told you so, because my father was always like, he always wanted to play the skeptic. So when my mother said, well, what did your father have to say? And he said, he was just here. That's all you need to know. But that's the thing is, so my grandfather would have had 1,000 different lives. So why does he come as the grandfather? Because if he came as anything else, my father wouldn't know who he was. So we can do the same thing again. And you get people who are like the guy who wrote The Children of the Greys. He talked about his dog. He was upset with the Greys. Like, they brought my dog on there, and he was just furious. Like, they're playing with my mind because they brought my dog, and the dog was flesh and blood and real as can be. So they can come in. So they can come into the physical world. And you hear this story all the time. It comes as a ball of light. And all these orb people will say, there's a being, and I can see the faces in these orbs. And so they come in, they turn into a flesh and blood ET, and then they turn back to a ball of light and go away. So is it a ball of light, or is it a flesh and blood? They can move from one to the other. We think it's just nuts and bolts. There is no the physical part. We just believe it's all nuts and bolts. They realize you can move in and out, but we can do the same thing as with my father, that you can move in and come in. You have physical manifestations with physical mediums that I deal with a lot with, where they come in, and I've talked to people, the one where John Lennon comes in and the guy was there, and I said, so was he really physical? He said he was standing on my wife's foot. My wife will tell you he was for real. And that's the whole thing. You get these cross things where you can move from one to the other, and that's the whole idea, that we're in the 15th century, that we just don't understand the basic principles. We're assuming this, it's wrong. We're assuming this, it's wrong. We assume it's a random world. We assume it's made out of nuts and bolts. We're making all these false assumptions as to how it works. They know how it works. It's not paranormal, but they're able to come into the physical world and go back into whatever world they live in. And ETs can do it. Dead people can do it. There's all sorts of people who are coming back and forth across that boundary.
But do you think there's a universe-wide, if I want to call it that, upgrade to all of it? Like the ETs or non-humans are also evolving. We're looking to them as if they're already there, but maybe they're looking to us. This is just a theory that maybe we have something as well that can add to their evolution. So it seems like we're all in this together.
I just quickly say for myself, I mean, that's what the universe is. We have it as a capitalism thing. And I always say there's not a single thing that's capitalist about an alien. And basically when you get past that, it's all about making the one better, about evolving, that the world is like, I think Edgar Mitchell said this, it's a learning system where it gets more and more complex, where the universe, it's all information and it's learning. So they're doing the same thing. They're making the world, the one, a better, more evolved, and they're learning, and it doesn't stay stagnant. It just keeps getting more complex and bigger, and it's all information, and they're part of it and they understand, but they're more into making the one, whereas we're into separation. We're into individual, me versus you, good versus bad, that kind of stuff.
So no, I agree. So Ray, just to kind of wrap it all up, I mean, I think we can keep going a little bit, but what do you say the next step for people listening to this conversation, people waiting for your book? What can we do to prepare for contact, awakening, transformation? I mean, Grant sort of hinted at get out of the left brain.
Let me raise 2 points. Okay. The first point that I want to ask for your audience members, and also for Grant and Kathy and yourself, is it reasonable to state that this whole aspect of UFOs, ETs, and space and non-human intelligence, that it was actually Star Trek that propagated that all around the world? Okay.
Well, science fiction existed long before Star Trek.
No, but I mean that was quite limited. But what it got to the worldwide level, okay, with Star Trek. When did Star Trek start? It was
1967. 67, I think
yeah.
it was. 66.
Yeah. All right, the late 60s, early 70s, okay? Then the whole issue of out-of-body experiences, when did that become popular? With Robert Monroe.
75.
Yeah, exactly.
75, okay? And then near-death experience, when did Raymond Moody write his book?
Was that-
1975,
Okay.
okay?
That's when Grant had his experience too.
Okay.
And when
So-
Travis Walton was abducted.
And
Yeah.
Travis Walton, yes.
So the whole issue of ghosts and spirits that was really popular in the late 1800s with
Yeah.
Frederick Myers and the Spiritismo or whatever you
Spiritualist movements.
spiritualist
and,
movement, that sort of thing. Okay.
Yeah.
But basically three
And that
out
was the
of,
same time that the airship phenomena happened, when the paranormal, spiritual movement was happening. Yeah.
okay, but let's just focus on NDEs, OBEs, and UFOs, which I consider 3 out of the 4 main contact modalities. In the nature of our book, if you can see, we have here Nois. Nois, okay, is a Latin term, means
Right.
mind and knowledge.
Noose. Yeah, noose. Yeah.
Okay,
No
and that's why we started NOUS.
Oh, very
NDEs,
nice.
OBEs,
That's good.
UFOs, and spirit. Little mind game there.
That's
okay,
where Edgar Mitchell got the idea for Noetic Institute from the word.
correct,
noose.
correct. Okay,
Yeah.
now 3 out of those 4 started in roughly the same time period, within 5 years of each other. Okay, now this is before the internet now, so you can't blame the internet for that. Now, my question, was that a coincidence?
Well, Grant says there are no
There's no such things as a coincidence, okay? These are all orchestrated events that are slowly preparing us, okay? That because my experiences, I don't talk about the vast majority of my experiences. These have been orchestrated events. I don't talk about them publicly because they're just so freaking crazy, okay? And it tends to undermine your credibility, okay? But these are all orchestrated events, okay? Now, that's one topic I wanted to bring out. The other thing is regarding this organization. Again, if anyone wants to send me an email to info@experience.org, I will send you this 7-page document, which is an introduction to the organization and what our agenda is. And it has a series of all the PhD academics involved in here. And it continues, multiple pages, et cetera, okay? So I'll send you the overview picture. Now, let me tell you about a little trick I did with Raymond Moody, with Jeffrey Long, and with Gary Schwartz, okay? We went out to where they live, Raymond Moody in Alabama, Jeffrey Long in Houma, Louisiana, and Gary Schwartz in Tucson, Arizona. So I played a little trick with each of them. We were interviewing them for our documentary. So as we were starting, I asked them a series of questions that we took from the free survey. But as Grant was saying, and Kathleen certainly knows about the interrelationship between NDEs and UFO contact, okay? I didn't tell them these were UFO-related questions from our survey, okay? I just started asking them all these questions. So after a half an hour of asking these questions, I said, to these 3 individuals, Raymond Moody, Jeffrey Long, and Gary Schwartz, okay? I said, do you realize that these were all questions that we asked in our UFO research experiential research study? And then I took out the book, the big massive book, and they were like, we thought that these were NDE related questions. I said, no. Do you realize that the same thing happens to UFO contact experiences? I had no idea. I thought these are people walking around with tinfoil hats, and I want nothing to do with ufology. Those are all a bunch of quacks. I said, well, what about now, based upon our data? And then all of a sudden they became very, very interested. And then I went through all the survey responses and their jaws literally dropped. They had no idea about the UFO contact experience phenomenon and data, okay? Each of them, okay, after we finished, they said, and Rudy was there with me, Rudy Shields. They said to me and to Rudy, they said, would it be possible to join you guys? Because all of them stated to me that consciousness is primary, that all of these paranormal experiences are somehow interrelated. So they all had the same mindset, but they didn't want to touch UFOs because they thought it was all a bunch of crackpots, And part of me—
Thanks to the Navy and the Air Force for making it seem that way, really.
Well, I mean, to tell you quite frankly, part of me still believes that,
Well, you're one of us, Ray.
No, I'm not.
You've seen them.
I'd rather spend my time not listening to these speakers who know very, very little about the phenomenon from my perspective. And I'd rather spend my time outside talking to the experiencers because they know what the hell's going on. It's not these lecturers with these huge egos that act like they know it all, but yet they don't know jack shit, okay? And so so that's why these people who are, you know, really advanced, sophisticated researchers who are heavy into theory and research, they didn't want anything to do with UFOs, but now they understand that the phenomenon needs to be brought into whatever their mindset was, their incorporation. So I just wanted to back up what Grant was saying before, because and Kathy certainly knows because she's read all of our data, the commonalities, oh my God, between NDEs and UFO contact experiencers is roughly the same experience. And let me just give you one aspect. Grant mentioned something about electronic issues, okay? I heard a lecture of Bruce Grayson. Bruce Grayson is now a retired professor out of the University of Virginia. He's a medical doctor. He's a psychiatrist. He's also one of the world's leading authorities on near-death experiences, okay? And he's was a longtime faculty member at the Division of Perceptual Studies. And I won't go into that group, but that's a very, very important group of academics. He had a lecture where he was invited to India to talk about NDEs to a whole bunch of Buddhist monks and the top Buddhist institutes in India, right? So there he goes about talking about NDE experiencers cannot wear watches, okay? Computers blowing up, going under street lamps, the lights are flickering on and off, a whole range of electronic malfunctions, okay? When I read that, I was like, holy shit, that's what's in our survey, okay?
It's vibration. It's whatever takes you to that new vibration.
And so I asked Jeffrey Long, you know, afterwards, I gave him a call. And I said, Jeffrey, does your data, and because you've spoken with, you know, thousands of NDE experiences, he says, it's all filled with that data about electronic devices, okay? Also, how communication takes place between both, telepathically. Okay, with both groups in our free research study, we had 50% of the people that were brought to a matrix reality, what I call a matrix reality. Oh, and NDE is people being brought to a matrix reality, okay? The number one type of being in our survey was the energy being, okay, at like 56%. The number two was the human looking being, okay? The number three was the short grays, and the number four was the ghost and spirit form, okay? So that's four. Now, three out of those top four, except for the gray, okay, are all seen in an NDE, okay? Both experiences involve out-of-body experiences. When you die, you're looking at your body underneath, okay? But yet, when people are being brought to other UFOs or other realities, they saw themselves going through a wall, going through a physical object, okay? And 80% of these people have had OBEs. We asked that survey question, okay? 80% have had out-of-body experiences. So I could go on, it'll take the whole night to talk about the comparisons between NDEs and the UFO contact. So they're interrelated. We just need to be able to try to understand that interrelationship.
Maybe people just need different ways of awakening their consciousness. I just want to ask one more question. Well, I just want to address this thing about awakening our DNA to communicate with our galactic family. I think if you're listening to this conversation, your DNA is awakening, because because if you're interested in this, there's already an evolution to the vibration. Like it could be out of body, it could be NDE, it could be UFO. But Kathleen, I want to go back to you, because there's also something Grant brings up sometimes. Like once you get into this, you're on a mission. There's some kind, you go down the rabbit hole, and then it's like, I don't know why I'm obsessed with this. I mean, we could go on all night talking about this, but there's a sort of idea of like, there's some sort of mission. I don't know what that is, but did you get that sense when you were 11, 13 years old? Like when you heard about your aunt, like, did it hit you like this would be your life, sort of?
Well, when I heard that about my aunt's experience when I was 13 years old, I was intrigued. I was very interested, but it was more in astronomy than where I am now. But I
When did it
always
become a
had that
mission?
interest. I met nearly all of the investigators who were investigating her case over a number of years. And I was very, very impressed with them and what they were doing. And I thought, wow, I would love to be able to do that someday. So it took me going through my career and finally becoming ill to reach that point where I said, I want to do this thing that I've been thinking about since I was a teenager. And, I follow your bliss. And that's when I decided to do that. And it was a learning process for me. It wasn't like Rey just being thrown into it with all the information at once. But I think I was very fearful. Rey wasn't fearful, I don't think. Were you, Rey?
No, not at all.
No, not at all. But I came into this with a lot of fear. And I think that fear is the enemy. And once I was able to overcome that fear and have hypnosis. I had hypnosis with Bud and a couple of other people. But when I was really able to get to a point where I could have hypnosis and I would meet these individuals, I would be on a table, but they were sending the most loving thoughts to me. I mean, it wasn't just thoughts, it was the most powerful sensation of love. Nothing you feel here on earth. It was incredible.
And love and near-death experiences, when people return from an NDE, the people are asked, what's the most important thought that you have of your experience? Everyone says, well, first of all, as Grant said, we're all one. And number two, love.
Yeah.
Unconditional love, yeah. That they never felt anything like it in their life.
Yeah.
And that's what you felt from ETs too, huh, Kathleen?
It does.
Yeah.
And the idea that you are family, that you're all one.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then you get the deal with the people saying both the near-death experience and the ET is more real than real. People think, oh, it's an illusion, it's a dream, whatever. And they say, no, you're in the dream. This is the real world. Where I was is the real world. And what's the other one? The soul contract. I mentioned this to Kathy, where both have this idea where you're on this mission that you've got this soul contract. And especially with, if you take people back and people think, you're a victim of this thing. And when you go back and then you ask them, did you agree to be in this? And it's like, yeah. And it's like, they're our family. We are them, almost like they're us and we are them idea, where that people think that that's my real family out there. And then the other one with the near-death experience, where people come back, 75% get divorced. And we have the same thing in the UFO community, where nobody understands you. And people always come to me and say, they always tell you their experience, and they say, nobody understands me. I say, get used to it. That's the pattern. It's almost like a near-death experience, where you come back and you're like this crazy guy and nobody wants to talk to you. And they have the same. That's why I asked what's her name? She did the work for Jeffrey Long. Her name is
her wife, his wife.
Well, no, this is this lady from Calgary that was doing, she went through a lot of his stuff. But anyway, I asked her, I said, because she said her mother was an atheist and her father didn't have anything to do with religion. I said, what about your kids? What do your kids think? Now they think I'm crazy. It's the same story. And she's doing near-death experiences and she's got all this data. It's the same story. I mean, it's identical.
But what about this idea of this mission? Like, I think we're all sort of obsessed with the topic. Are we like the early Christians saying you got to believe? Or, I mean, something is changing, I hope, in the population.
Well, Alan, I think all of us can say the same thing, that since my initial experience started, the first 9 months or so, I was just, waiting, just trying to understand and grasp with my reality. My experiences only lasted 2.5 years, but I was on the fast track. It was nonstop for 2.5 years. It was like one thing on top of another. And then after I went to Chris's house, Grant, and then Chris validated the same thing that happened to me, then all of a sudden it just stopped. And what it was that I was questioning this human looking non-human intelligence. I was, because I'm a very rational person. And so I was denying it. And so when Chris said the same exact thing that this person told me, then that's when I stopped. I stopped, like you're saying, the fear, Kathy, for me, it was my rationality. I stopped my rational thinking and I just accepted it. I said, this shit is real, And, but anyway, getting back to missions, all of us are on mission overdrive. Okay.
Yeah.
I literally spend, more time on my work than I do with my IRS tax work, than I do with my family. Okay. I'm taking hiatus over the last 6 months because of the transition that I'm going with, but it's something that I'm going to have till I die. It's not going to go away, and I'm sure Grant feels the same way.
It's the most exciting thing going on. The possibility of other intelligence. What do you call it, Grant? The World Series? What's your?
The Super Bowl of all stories. If you understand what's going on. Yeah.
And I mean, just look at all of us before these experiences started. I say for myself as an individual, here I was, a total atheist. I'm going to live, I'm going to die, I'm going to live my boring life. I got the worst job in the world as an IRS tax attorney, the most boring job in the world. And all of a sudden I have the most stimulating, job in the world, which is trying to understand the nature of our reality and the connection with the afterlife, So it's like a total dichotomy. But one last thing, but before we leave for everyone here, again, send me an email. I will send you all the materials we have at info@experiencer.org. And that includes peer-reviewed academic articles that we published. But I want to leave the thought to everyone here is that start thinking outside of the box, outside of nuts and bolts, outside of our materialist reality, because the vast majority of these forward thinkers that I'm working with, including all the panelists here, we all hypothesize that our reality is an illusion, that is something much, much more complicated outside of that. So start thinking and moving in that direction, and that will begin to give you the beginnings of a spiritual immersion of who we are.
No, thank you for that, Ray. Yeah, this is a spiritual emergence that we are planetarily. Grant, what were you saying though about?
Yeah, I just wanted to, my final thought is always the one I always leave people is that I think the difference between us and people on the street is that most people are living lives of quiet desperation. You take your kids to soccer practice, you go and do your job, and you just worry about paying the bills, and you really don't worry. And once you hit this thing where you suddenly realize we came from somewhere, we're going somewhere, and we came to this world for a reason, everything changes.
Yeah,
exactly.
And that's all you have to really worry about. You don't worry about what everybody else is doing. You just have to worry about, I came to the earth. if the reincarnation is a fact, I probably came here for some particular reason. And all I got to do is figure out what the hell am I supposed to be doing? And am I doing it? And it really doesn't matter what anybody else is doing.
Right. Do you feel that way, Kathy? No?
I think so. The majority of experiencers of this become more spiritual, more psychic, they become empathic, they view the world differently than they did before. And so it's all very good. This is all very positive. And I think that it's really important for all of us who know this to communicate it to the public, to try to raise human consciousness, because we have so much hatred on this planet, so much violence, and it's a message that is very important. We need to raise this human consciousness.
We need to transcend. We actually asked that question. How did, we used the word ET, but we defined it as non-human intelligence as well. We asked, how did ET contact change your life? Was it positive, negative, or neutral? And almost 80% said it was a positive change. Almost 60% said it was extremely positive, how they changed as a human being. And the negative aspects, slightly negative was like 6%, and highly negative was like 4%. So here we have 80% of the people said it changed their lives completely in terms of spirituality. All of a sudden, they're not materialist, they're less religious, they're more loving. I mean, on and on and on. And we borrowed those questions from Dr. Kenneth Ring from his book, The Omega Project. We asked 60 questions of how did these people change? And it's unbelievable, the responses, Alan. So from my perspective, I hope that everybody in this world has ET contact, because we would not have the massive destruction, the hate, the violence, the exploitation of humanity. New human beings, butterflies will come out.
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, I always say the ETs are making us more human. More about who we really are as human beings, our ability for empathy, feeling, love.
Yes. And it's all in the data. I mean, we asked 4,200 people from over 100 countries. So it's not just 5 or 6 people. This is thousands of people all over the world that answered these questions. They all changed the same way. They started off as caterpillars. All of a sudden, they're beautiful butterflies.
No, I think this is a very exciting time. I think researchers like all of you are bringing human consciousness to a new level, a higher vibration, to realize there's something more to this, and that not only are we reaching up to wherever that is, something's reaching down to us. And I think we're very close to like a huge shift coming on. It's not just government disclosure, it's consciousness disclosure, it's consciousness awakening. So everyone, keep up the great work. I'm not going to stop being obsessed with this subject either. And thank you for your time. Kathleen, what's your website that people can find you at?
Kathleen-Marden, MARDEN.com.
Okay. And Grant, you are again?
BeyondPresidentialUFO.com.
Right. And Ray, what's yours?
We're developing a new website for the CCRI organization, but in the meantime, I can send out tons of documents for free, most of them from our book and the peer-reviewed publication. So the email is info@experiencer.org, info@experiencer.org.
Right. And I'm Alan Steinfeld. You can find me at youtube.com/newrealities. Look for a great book coming out next year called Making Contact, where I have a lot of these researchers in there. I think it's another way that's going to help shift the public. And we're going to keep doing this.
Alan, can I give one a little chunk of information, but I'm not authorized to reveal it. Okay. Very soon there's going to be an unveiling of a parallel organization to do the work that we're doing, and many of the people in our organization are going to also be working with this other organization, but that other group is going to have significant funding, major funding. Okay. And so it involves heavy duty research, focusing on all these aspects of consciousness and the contact modalities, but the focus is on the afterlife. Okay, right. How can we demonstrate that the afterlife exists? So that's this particular funder.
You know, Leslie wrote a book about that. After her last book, she's just written a book.
Oh yeah. Bob Davis wrote a book on that. Jeffrey Long, tons of people have written books on that. But this is heavy duty researchers that have that consciousness bent. And I don't think Leslie has that.
You know who my favorite, Anita Morjani is one of my favorite near-death.
Yes, she's wonderful. So very soon, hopefully within a year, it'll be announced. There's going to be serious money, unlike the work that Free was doing with zero funding. But this is now major megabucks.
Great. Well, like Grant says, this is the Super Bowl that we are in. And if you're watching this, you're in it too. There's a reason anytime you're tuning into any of these dialogues. I think it's great just to get together. It helps all of us trust what we know more. At least it does for me, you know. So thanks again. Thank Neil Gore and Portal to Ascension for making this possible. And Kathleen, you do really look 20 years young.
You do, and you've had like a facelift. You've had special. You had like a face
Maybe I've had a visit recently.
A face peel. Looks like you have like a fake wig on because your hair is lovely. You just look. You look like a woman in your 40s. So whoever you call down, Kathy, you know, send them over here to get rid of.
I'll send them your way if I can.
Send out of my way.
And Grant, I'll be looking for your latest YouTubes, which are really exciting. I love the one you did today with Gwen Farrell.
Yeah, we got the ones with the kids. Is the most. I think it's the Nobel Prize stuff. We're doing the ones with the kids, and I've got like 8 organizations in the world that are working with these kids.
The kids that can read through
the blindfolds.
Yeah.
That is good. That goes again to near-death experience. As soon as I saw that, I said, this is near-death experience, and these kids can hear from a mile away. They have 20/20 sight. They can read books. They can do all this kind of stuff. And that's, again, that's what you have when you leave your body. It gives you this whole new paradigm that you don't just see through your eyes. You can actually, if you leave your body, your eyes are taped shut on the operating table, and you can see, you can hear, and they've recreated this. And it's like the UFO thing. It's like, if it were a fair world, it's a Nobel Prize, but it's not a fair world, so everybody's going to ignore it, just like they have ignored us for 70 years.
Well, this is why this is the most exciting time to get into this and evolve. We are really at a breakthrough point for humanity. Thanks for all the work.
Yeah.
And thank you, Neil. And we'll say good night. That's been really fun.
Thanks for what you do.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Okay.
And I have
Really
much
good to
respect
see.
for Grant and Kathleen. They were part of my mentoring network. So thank both of you for the many, many years of hard work that you have done.
And you
But-
too, Ray.
You've done
But
a
it was
lot
all
of
meant
hard
to be,
work,
Ray. It
Ray.
always intended that way.
Oh yeah, most
Wait.
definitely.
You've caught up with a lot of hard work since your initiation.
Yeah, I had the fast track.
Good night.
Thanks.
Good night,
for
Good
everyone.
night.
chat and everyone online, and see you next time. Okay.